I've been a little bit sneaky. We've actually been looking at or studying Pentecost for the last 4 to 5 weeks. And we've been focusing in Acts chapter 2, where there's this phrase that says they devoted themselves to. There was this tremendous moment of Pentecost, a tremendous moment where people began speaking in other languages. And the Bible says thousands of people get saved. And then it tells us how the church formed and started and developed on Pentecost. So that phrase, they devoted themselves to, means to consistently and persistently do something with intensity. And we've been looking at teaching. We've been looking at prayer. Today, we're going to be talking about community. May 24th, 2003, I got married. So my anniversary is Friday, 21 years. It will be for me and Rachel. 19 of them have been good. I mean, I'm joking. No. What's interesting about marriage is that two relative strangers come together, and it's never 50-50. It's never 50-50. As a matter of fact, when I deal with counseling sessions, marital counseling sessions, people go, well, I bring my 50% and they bring their 50%, and that makes 100%. That's bad math when it comes to marriage, because it's 100% and 100% equal 100%. So I remember we got married, and when you get married, it's a very strange feeling because you know the drill if you've been married. All of a sudden, what is hers is yours. So all of a sudden, I inherit her whole family, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And she inherits my whole family, the ugly. And so I'm kidding. My parents are actually here today from Texas. They flew in this week and have been with us all week. But yeah, but it's a weird ceremony. Marriages. We walk down an aisle single, not having anybody else's responsibilities, and you walk out with everybody's responsibilities. All of a sudden, her mom is my mom, her dad is my dad, and vice versa, right? We share everything together. It's called a covenant. We made a covenant with one another that we would do life with one another for the rest of our lives, and even in some of the vows, even into eternity. That is what marriage is, and marriage represents the perfect union of what covenant actually looks like. And when it comes to the concept of community, and I'm not going to be long today, community is this moment where we all kind of come together and do life together. And the Bible actually instructs us that we should be doing this all the time. As a matter of fact, in Acts chapter 2, it says that they persistently and consistently with intensity gathered together all the time. And the Bible actually uses this word fellowship. Now, us Pentecostals, we like to think of tongues. We like to think of the expressive gifts, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes we forget that on the day of Pentecost, the whole purpose of Pentecost was the formation of a group of people coming together as one. I mean, even the dynamic experience that they experienced in the upper room, the Bible tells us that they spoke in other languages, and that other people from other nations were sitting there listening to people praising God in their own tongues. And Acts actually records that there are people from Egypt and Libya and Crete and all these different things. And they're listening to these uneducated fishermen speak in other languages. And we get all excited about that, as we should, because it's a tremendous moment. But I don't want you to miss the purpose of the moment. The purpose of the moment is that the gospel, that God's new covenant people was not going to be reserved for one people group. The picture of the church, the beauty of the church, the wonder of the church is that it's filled with white and brown and black and yellow and old and young and rich and poor, diversity amongst people coming together as one. Now, most people think of the church, and I'm off my notes. I might get back to them in a second. Most people think of the church as an aggregation of people. So when you read a passage like, say, Hebrews chapter 10, not neglecting to meet together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. We think this meeting together is an aggregation. Do you know what an aggregation is? An aggregation is like this. I'm a golfer. I didn't say I was a good golfer, but I golf. An aggregation is this. Everybody is disconnected during the week, sometimes several weeks, and then we come together for a Sunday, and I had multicolor here for a purpose, but we come together for a Sunday. Not everybody makes it into the bag, and we hear somebody lecture for 20, 30 minutes. We sing some songs, things get shaken up, and then we go back and live our separate lives. That's the idea that a lot of people have with church. They think it's an event. They think it's something that we do on Sundays. They think it's something that we get dressed up for and eat lunch afterwards and hang out for an hour or so and hear some Bible stories. That's the image that culture believes church is all about. Matter of fact, some of you came in for the first time because some of your friends were getting baptized and you're like, oh, we got to go to church. See, we're going to an event kind of like we go to a movie. And just like a movie, we sit in chairs looking at a screen, watching somebody perform. And we may have an emotional moment where that movie was awesome, or it moves us to tears, or it changes the way we think about something. And then we all get up when the lights go on and we walk out the doors, never really connecting with one another. And that is most of what Western people think when they think about the church. But when the Hebrew writer is writing and says, do not neglect meeting together, he uses the Greek word episynagogue, which means kind of congregation. Not an aggregation, but a congregation. It's illustrated by really a cluster of grapes where we're connected by a vine. That's the image of the church. Paul actually goes a little bit further because with grapes, you can, peel them off and eat them, right? I needed a snack for a moment. That was a workout. I don't need to work out for another week. Paul uses this metaphor. That's disgusting. I shouldn't have done that. Oh, give me a second. Paul uses the image, not of grapes, but of a body that can't be disconnected. That to be disconnected actually requires a lot of pain. And he says this, he says, when one member of the body gets injured, the whole body feels it, right? Have you ever stubbed your toe on the bed frame of your house in the middle of the night? Your whole body shudders, right? You go into fits and say things that only Jesus knows. The whole body gets hurt. So Paul's metaphor is that we are so closely connected in life, in covenant with one another, that we can't be disconnected from one another. Does that make sense? And here's what happens a lot of times. I've done this several times in my life. I've baptized hundreds of people in my life. And what happens is a lot of times people think that when they go into the water and they come out, they're done. They've hit the total experience of Christian life. They have been baptized. They no longer have to do anything else. But the Bible actually teaches the contrary. Acts chapter 2, thousands of people get baptized in that day. And the Bible records this at the end of Acts chapter 2. And the Lord added to their number daily. What is he saying there? He's saying that the Lord kind of fused or merged or brought people together in the covenant daily. So it's not a finish line. Never is a finish line. And it's never an event. Church is a merging of ourselves with one another. You know why church is so weak today in the Western experience? Is that we no longer fuse ourselves together. So therefore, we're like the weak gazelle at the back of the herd in the Serengeti, and we are getting picked off one after another, after another, after another, after another, because we have decided that church is an event and not the merging of one another. We come together because God calls us to come together. And when we come together, we remain together. And when we remain together, it helps you draw closer to God. Hebrews says this again, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from evil conscience and our body washed with pure water. And this idea is this is done collectively and actively. And when you read the Greek, it is in present tense, meaning that we are doing this over and over and over and over, never ceasing, always presently doing it. And the author gives us 4 ideas here. We are to do this with sincerity. We are to do this with assurance, and we are to do this with a clean heart. So let's talk about sincere hearts. So I was pastoring in Alabama pre-Nick Saban. If you follow college football, you know that Nick Saban is like the greatest coach ever in college football. And I was pastoring in Alabama before Nick Saban came to coach the University of Alabama. And I can tell you, back then, nobody was wearing Alabama gear. Nobody. Nobody would walk by me and go, "Roll Tide." Nobody would do that. They wouldn't do that. They would just simply stay quiet. But as soon as Alabama started winning national championships, everybody that I knew in Alabama became a Crimson Tide fan. And you know what? That makes me angry. And I'll tell you why. I'm an Oklahoma Sooner fan. Sooner born, Sooner bred. When I die, I'll be Sooner dead, baby. And thick and thin, I lived through seasons where they were terrible, and I've lived through seasons where they win the national championship. But I can tell you this, my belief is sincere in them. Does that make sense? And so when the writer of Hebrews says sincere hearts, he's saying that when we come together, we're not insincere out in the world 6 days of the week and become sincere on the 7th day. He's saying that every part of our life is sincerely devoted to Jesus. But the only way that happens is within the context of community. I pastored in Dallas for 7 years, and I loved my congregation. Some people watch these services today. I loved my congregation in Dallas, but I was also frustrated with my congregation in Dallas. Dallas is a commuter city and lots of suburbs. If you've ever been to Dallas, Dallas proper is rather small, less than about 1 million people, but the suburbs spread out to about 7 million people. It's like LA, if you've been to LA. And what would frustrate me about my congregation is I'd have people living in Louisville and Grapevine and Southlake and Keller and Roanoke and all these different communities that literally, if they wanted to, they could come to my church and never interact with one another out in the world. And that's kind of okay with a lot of people, especially in the West. Some of you pull up into your driveway, you hit your remote control that opens up the garage door. You drive all the way in. You hit the remote to close the garage door before you ever get out of the car because you don't want to interact with anybody. And I might be talking to myself because I am an introvert by nature. Most people think, oh, Jason's an extrovert. No. Just talk to Rachel like I am a recluse. But we're not called to live that way. If you want a sincere faith, you have to engage with the people because that's what brings accountability to your sincerity. But not only that, he uses the word assurance. We gain assurance within a community. I can draw near to God with assurance. And why does this happen? It happens because all around me, I see men and women who have struggled with various difficulties in life, and yet I still see them serving God. So if they can serve God, I can have the assurance that I can serve Him no matter what comes my way. Again, the metaphor is never to make yourself isolated from the herd. But then the Hebrew writer says clean and clear conscience. And here's why this is done in community. While we are commended to strive for holiness, it's hard to strive for holiness in a vacuum. In other words, it rarely works that I have holiness without accountability. This is similar to what the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews chapter 3. He says this, take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God, but exhort one another every day as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of your heart. The only way this happens is through community and fusing together with other people. Proverbs would say it this way: iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Have you ever seen that show Forged by Fire or Forged in Fire, that History Channel show where they take like a piece of metal and they make it into a sword and they get it hot and they pound it? They pound it with hammers, and they get it hot, and they pound it with hammers. It's an arduous, difficult, painful process. And a lot of times we quote that verse as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And we forget that sometimes accountability comes with pain. And it comes with vulnerability too. You can't be accountable in a community if you're not vulnerable about your struggles with life. And Christians are great at ignoring the struggles of life. Right? You walk in, how you doing today? I'm good. Great. Things are awesome. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, if we pull the curtain back, all hell is breaking loose in your life. You're not fine. You're not great. You're not good. But you can never get freed of that stuff unless you begin to be vulnerable to the community. Does that make sense? So we remain together because community helps us draw close to God, but we remain together in order to hold on to the faith. The context of the book of Hebrews is this: the writer writes Hebrews because there are people who are sitting here looking around going, Jesus isn't coming back. It's been several years. Jesus isn't coming back. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we should go back to the Jewish religion. That's why the Hebrew writer writes to the Hebrew people a letter called the Hebrews. and why he focuses on Jesus being greater than Moses, Jesus being greater than the temple, Jesus being greater than the angels. This is beautiful Christology that puts Jesus at the center supreme. But the reason he's doing that is a bunch of people are starting to abandon the faith and go back to what they wanted to do or where they started at the beginning. So we remain together to hold on to the faith. Does that make sense? We remain together because God helps us draw closer to him. We remain together to hold on to the faith. And finally, and we're about to close, we remain together to persuade one another into good works and demonstrate love. I love this phrase. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. That word consider is interesting. It's used elsewhere in Hebrews. In Hebrews 3:1, it says, therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. The way the word is translated is really fixed to fully think about, focus, and contemplate. So the Hebrew writer is basically saying this: let us focus and think about and contemplate how to stir up love that comes out of us. No. How to stir up other people to love and good works. Do you get that? Oftentimes in Western church, it's about me, right? Pastor, that sermon really touched me today. Oh, worship, y'all sang my favorite song. Oh, the Lord moved upon me today. It's always fixed on me. Well, what the Hebrew writer is saying, let us think about, focus on, contemplate, not how to stir up me, but how to stir up other members within this community. You want to know what a healthy church looks like? A healthy church looks like people who unselfishly consider and contemplate and focus on how to make the other person better. That's what a healthy church looks like. A healthy church looks like a family sitting in the corner in great need and somebody over here going, how can I focus and contemplate and think about that person there to stir them into good works, to show them the love of God, and to make them feel a part of what we are. That's a healthy church. So when the day of Pentecost came, and there was this ecstatic moment, and people were speaking in tongues, and there was fire upon people's heads, and there was wind blowing. The purpose of it, as they began to express the glory of God out of their mouths in unknown languages that they were not skilled or trained in, was an invitation by God that everybody belonged or could belong to this community. Despite your age, despite your language, despite your color, despite your ability to give or not, everybody is invited to the table to enjoy God and one another. This is the picture of the church. And this is the expression of Pentecost. The expression of Pentecost is that we are merged with one another.